Washington thought Canada would break. A divided parliament, rising prices, public pressure. The plan was simple: squeeze hard enough, and Ottawa would fold. But that plan just collapsed. Right now, the political math inside the House of Commons is shifting drastically. Instead of fracturing under the weight of external threats, the Canadian legislative apparatus is rapidly consolidating. Instead of turning on the current administration, the public is identifying the true source of the volatility. Mark Carney is quietly securing the architecture of his own government, ensuring absolute predictability as the nation prepares for one of the most consequential diplomatic showdowns of this decade. The expectation south of the border was that economic anxiety would distract the government, forcing them to negotiate from a position of profound weakness. That expectation has now been entirely neutralized.
Allow that. Last thing I'll say is that this year is a very volatile year, geopolitically, economically speaking. We have the review of the USMCA coming up this summer. We have a war in the Middle East that's raging on. We don't know where that's going to go. Imagine there is an election called around the summertime when all of this is going on. What does that mean for Canada? What does that mean for the Prime Minister's ability to maintain negotiations? That's a challenge and I think a risk for them.
That is not commentary. That is positioning. The upcoming review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or CUSMA, is the undisputed focal point of North American trade relations. Scheduled for this summer, this review was originally designed as a standard operational check-in. However, under an erratic and unpredictable Trump administration, it has evolved into a high-stakes mechanism for renegotiation. Washington fully intends to use this deadline to extract massive concessions from its neighbors, relying on the explicit threat of systemic economic disruption. The American calculation assumes that Canada will arrive at the table fractured and desperate. To survive a review of this magnitude, a nation cannot be distracted by internal political survival. It requires a unified front, seamless legislative authority, and a clear, undisputed mandate from the public. The contrast could not be sharper. One leader chooses volatile external threats. The other chooses internal stability. Ottawa understands that if the federal government is paralyzed by a minority parliament, it cannot act swiftly to implement domestic subsidies, redirect supply chains, or authorize retaliatory trade measures. The opposition parties could delay critical legislation, turning Canadian economic resilience into a subject of endless partisan debate. Every procedural delay in Ottawa would be read by the White House as a sign of structural weakness. This raises a fundamental question for policymakers. How do you protect a domestic market from an erratic superpower when your own legislative process is vulnerable to delays? The answer lies in the subtle mechanics of parliamentary math. A single by-election in Terrebonne is no longer just a local political contest. It has become the mechanism through which Ottawa plans to secure total operational control, effectively locking down the government ahead of the summer deadline. The stakes for North American trade have never been higher, and Ottawa is preparing its positions accordingly.
What is your primary question about what they then do with it?
Well, I think what they really need to do is to win the Terrebonne riding, so it gets to 173. This means they will actually have a real majority, a slim one, but a real majority, because with 172, the Speaker cannot vote except in a tie. Could be in a tie situation, but a tradition is that he would not vote. So therefore, if there was a tight legislation, it would be a tie. So they need that Terrebonne riding to be able to have majority control. And then if they do that, I think you're going to see one of the first things they do. The Prime Minister has ruled out prorogation, but they can change the standing orders so that they get control of the committees, because right now they cannot control the committees, and they've had, over the last little while, although not recently, but the last little while, they've had long delays in getting some legislation through, including the budget implementation bill. So I think that'll be one of the first acts they do, is to try to get control of the committee, and that will be a big mess because the opposition parties, particularly the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives, will be raising bloody hell.
This is code. Ottawa is securing the legislative engine. By reaching the 173-seat threshold, the government moves from a precarious minority to a functional, unassailable majority. Controlling the parliamentary committees means controlling the speed of the nation's economic response. When American tariffs hit, or when domestic industries require immediate capital to pivot away from U.S. suppliers, legislation will no longer be stalled by opposition roadblocks. It will move with absolute efficiency. The old political playbooks are gone. The old vulnerabilities are gone. The old divisions are gone. Ottawa is establishing a completely new baseline for governance, one where long-term economic strategy takes absolute precedence over daily partisan friction. By quietly shifting the balance of power within the House of Commons, Mark Carney is neutralizing the very leverage Washington hoped to exploit. The White House wanted to negotiate with a paralyzed, divided Canadian government. Instead, they will be facing a tightly controlled legislative core capable of executing economic pivots in real time. But here is where the story becomes truly geopolitical, because political maneuvering only works if the public accepts the economic pain that comes with it. Make no mistake, the Canadian economy is feeling the strain. Grocery prices remain a central concern for households, and the overall cost of living has been exacerbated by the cross-border trade tensions. Small businesses and manufacturers are navigating intense supply chain uncertainties. Historically, this level of economic discomfort guarantees the destruction of an incumbent prime minister. The opposition traditionally capitalizes on the anxiety, promising immediate relief and forcing a change in leadership. That was the American calculation. They assumed the Canadian voter would simply blame Ottawa for the rising cost of goods and demand a rapid surrender to U.S. trade demands. Yet, something unprecedented is happening within the Canadian electorate. The psychological pressure campaign designed to break the nation's resolve is failing to register against the current leadership. Instead of a panicked public turning inward, the electorate is accurately tracing the economic volatility back to its source, fundamentally rejecting the narrative that Ottawa is to blame. The expected political collapse has simply not materialized, and the data reflects a profound shift in public consciousness.
For stability.
He's been lucky because Pierre Poilievre keeps trying to blame every job loss, inflation, everything on the Prime Minister. But Canadians know where that problem is coming from. It's south of the border, it's in the White House. And I think there's a sense from the Canadians that because of his experience as a former central banker at two places and running or being a chairman of a large trillion-dollar corporation, that he's the right person for the times, and they're giving him an awful lot of slack. When you think about it, 29% personal popularity over Pierre Poilievre, I've never seen those numbers in my life.
The numbers tell a definitive story. A 29% personal popularity advantage over the leader of the opposition is a staggering metric. It requires two distinct contexts to fully grasp its magnitude. For Canada, this number represents an ironclad domestic mandate. It means the Prime Minister has the absolute political capital required to endure a prolonged trade standoff without fear of a sudden collapse in public support. For the United States, that exact same number represents the complete neutralization of their primary strategic weapon, internal political division. Leverage, that is what this is about. Economic leverage, political leverage, negotiating leverage. At the center of this macroeconomic transformation is the human element. The Canadian voter, whether a tradesperson in Ontario or a professional in Vancouver, is looking at the geopolitical landscape and making a calculated choice. They are experiencing the inflation. They are feeling the pressure of the tariffs, but they are choosing to trust the measured competence of a former central banker over the erratic demands of a foreign leader. They understand that the economic pain is not a failure of domestic policy, but the cost of achieving long-term independence from an unpredictable neighbor. By building this internal consensus, Mark Carney has fundamentally altered the power dynamics of the upcoming CUSMA negotiations. Washington can no longer bypass Ottawa by appealing to the frustrations of the Canadian public. The leverage has shifted. Canada is arriving at the table not as a fractured junior partner desperate for relief, but as a unified, structurally secure economy prepared to defend its own interests. What happened in Ottawa today was more than a routine political update. It was a defining moment. If you want sharp, fearless analysis of how Canada is navigating global pressure while expanding its economic power, this is the channel for you. We break down the strategy behind the speeches, the leverage behind the deals, and the leadership behind the headlines. Mark Carney isn't just reacting to events. He's reshaping Canada's global position in real time. Subscribe to Canada SR. Turn on notifications and stay ahead of the geopolitical shifts defining this decade. And now I want to hear from you. Will this unprecedented domestic support give Mark Carney the leverage he needs to defeat Trump's tariffs this summer, or will the economic pressure eventually force Ottawa to make major concessions? Let me know in the comments below.